Welcome, welcome to another edition of the Father. Good to see you all here. So again, this is open forum. Any question you may have. We've already kind of had somewhat of a discussion already in some ways, but that's good. So what do we got?
Yes. Are you familiar with the Catholic laity called Credo?
I am, yes.
What do you think?
So Credo, I think, does a lot of good work. They're on the more.
What is Credo?
Credo is a Catholic laity, so it's a lay organization. Yeah, lay organization. I don't know if it's an order. I wouldn't say it's an order, but because I don't think they actually take any type of like vows, or there's not like a consecration. But they are a lay order that's run entirely by laity. They are considered probably a little more on the conservative end of the Catholic Church. I think they do good work. I tend to think they sometimes get a little bit over their skis. One situation, for instance, comes to mind. They were apparently very vocal about some function of some. So maybe I should put it this way. There are some doctors that work in some Catholic hospitals that have either their own private practice or they're licensed in other facilities. And these doctors, I don't know if they're Catholic or not, but they apparently are performing some kind of abortifacient means outside of the Catholic facility, right? So in their own practice or in their own license with somebody else. Because these doctors work in a Catholic facility, there was a great, I guess, scandal, I don't know, that was brought by Credo about these particular doctors, and they actually got inflated to the point where they were saying these things were being done at these Catholic hospitals. It was investigated. It was found that that wasn't the case. I think there were some doctors that maybe lost their admitting privileges at those hospitals because of that. So in other words, it was rectified. But Credo, and I'm not sure if it was Credo proper, or just particular members of Credo, were calling for more to be done. And it's like, well, okay, what more can be done? We can't do anything other than, it's not like we can, like, put these doctors out of business, right? They're not working in a Catholic institution. They have their own practices, and we can condemn it and say, yeah, we're not for that, which I think they did. But also there's a level of privacy, and everyone has the right to a good name. So I think part of the problem was that they were calling for more transparency. Okay. But anyone who's ever worked in any type of company knows when you talk about personnel, that's internal, right? That's not something necessarily needs to be shared as confidential information. So I think that was kind of at the center point of this discussion. So that's what I mean. I think they tend to maybe make rationalization or conclusions sometimes without having all the information, as we all do on certain occasions, right? But I think for the most part, they try to do good work. They try to follow the Catholic Church's teaching. They try to uphold it. I think they look for accountability, which isn't a bad thing. But I think sometimes they tend to get a little bit too far into the weeds, where maybe they didn't really have any business doing that. But you can say that for any Catholic organization too sometimes, right? So yeah, no, I would encourage anyone to join it. I think it's a good spiritual practice. But I think with everything, we should be, we have to watch those pendulum swings. Mm-hmm. So
compare that with Opus Dei.
Okay, so Opus Dei is actually an order, right? So there's actually Opus Dei priests, there's Opus Dei brothers, Opus Dei. Well, they have a religious order. I don't know if they do, but a lot of orders have what they call like third order applications for like lay people. Like Franciscans and Dominicans, they have lay people who can join the order and to actually take some level of vows, right, to be part of the order, where that's different though than like a lay organization. So I would put Credo probably in the same category maybe as, what would be a good comparison? Maybe like Knights of Columbus, right? I don't know if there's like an initiation process for Credo. I'm not really sure. I think they probably pay some kind of dues, maybe. So I know priests can be a part of it, just like they could like Knights of Columbus. But that's more of a lay-run organization, right? Where things like Opus Dei, there's a charism involved that actually requires some discernment for people to be part of and actually be accepted by the order. That's a little bit different.
Now, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but aren't the Knights of Ladies of the Sepulchre?
Yeah, that'd be another kind of comparison, Knights and Ladies of Holy Sepulchre. So, but see, here's the thing, I don't know if even that's a good analogy or comparison, just because I know the Knights and Ladies have like an initiation process, as does like the Knights of Columbus, or like the Ladies and Gentlemen of Peter, the Society of Peter Claver. So all these these are all lay institutes. But a credo seems like it's more of a grassroots. I'm not even really sure if it's actually sanctioned by the Catholic Church, really. I don't know if there's actually an endorsement from the Catholic Church in that or not. I'm just not up to, I know I get some stuff from them every so often, but I don't necessarily look into it very often. I'm not really a member of their organization. But yeah, so I don't really know for sure. If they do have some initiation process, yeah, probably on the same order of the Knights and Ladies and the Knights of Columbus. Yeah.
Speaking of Knights of Columbus, my wife just asked this week, why don't we have a chapter at St. Gabe's? And I was just wondering if I know the cathedral has one, and lots of parishes do, but is how common is it, parish by parish? You say what percentage of parishes is that? But
Yeah, I would say it's a high percentage. It's interesting, like I know my home parish in Mac-a-Hart, they just kind of within the last maybe decade established a chapter there. And that's a relatively small parish. In the city, I think it might be less common than other places. Part of the argument here is, would that take away from the Holy Name Society, right? I don't know. I think those are two different missions and two different things going on between Holy Name and the Knights of Columbus. So I don't think there would necessarily be a bad idea to bring the Knights here. But that's not necessarily my call either. So no, I don't think it'd be a bad thing. But yeah, I think that's kind of part of the debate is, I think a lot of people look at either or, but it really could be both and.
you can only do so much.
Right, right. So yeah, I don't know.
What is the mission of the Knights of Columbus?
Yeah, so the primary mission of the Knights of Columbus, first off, is a secret organization. Maybe, I don't know. And so
Like a fraternity.
it's a fraternal group, and their main mission is to uphold the teachings of the church. And it's really kind of fostering vocations in ways, right? So not only vocation to fatherhood and to be a good husband, or even a good single person, but even vocations to religious orders and religious life and holy orders. So that's kind of their main mission. But in the context of that, they're really known for upholding especially pro-life values. So you'll see the Knights really sponsor a lot for like buying and installing ultrasound machines for like pregnant women, like in Thrive organizations or crisis nurseries, that kind of stuff. So they do a lot of charitable stuff for the pro-life cause and also for vocations. But also they're a social organization too, right? It's rooted in faith, but there's a lot of they have meetings usually once a month, or maybe more often depending on how much they do. But it's completely a lay-driven organization.
Okay.
Yeah. So they also have a women's auxiliary groups for that too. So yeah. Good. Anything else?
Well, I can go into my questions that I
Please.
got from going through the catechism. So this is kind of a random theological one. So it's about angels. If angels are all knowing and they don't have free will, is that right so far?
Okay, let's kind of break that down. To say they're all knowing, okay, angelic knowledge is different than what we call the Beatific Vision.
Okay.
So the Beatific Vision is the actual knowledge that God would have, right? Angels, even though they can see God for who he truly is, they don't know the inner workings of God in the same way the Trinity would, right? So they have what we call angelic knowledge, which means they would have the knowledge of the essences of all created things.
Okay.
So a good example of that be like, so we as human beings, we have experiential knowledge, right? So we can have some understanding of created things, but we wouldn't necessarily know what the essence of something would be. So if I were to say, okay, Sam, tell me what the essence of this chair is. That's actually hard for us to do, right? We can say, well, it's used for sitting. Okay, that's the purpose. What is the essence of it, right? Well, it's made out of wood. Well, that's the material cause. That's what it's made out of. What is the essence of it? Well, it's a four-legged thing with a back. Okay, well, that's a description of what it is, but that doesn't necessarily give the essence of it.
Yeah.
An angel could tell you what the chairness of it is, right?
Like in word form?
Well, that's a good question,
Okay.
right? What is the language of an angel? Because an angel doesn't have a body, they don't necessarily communicate in the same way that we would, right?
Okay.
So would that be like maybe like a psychokinetic way, right? Maybe, I don't know, right? Like when the archangel Gabriel appeared to Mary, we know there was some communication. Does an angel have the capacity to communicate in the same way a human does? Well, yeah, we would probably say yes, right? There's probably some way they could communicate to us in a human way, but that doesn't mean they necessarily communicate to each other that way. Okay. Now, the question of the free will of an angel. So an angel doesn't have the same free will as a human being does. The reason being because of the knowledge that an angel has, they can't necessarily err in their reasoning. We can. So we can choose something that may not be good for us or be the best thing for us and err in that, which means we can also repent of it, right? We can choose to turn away from those things and turn to God. An angel has one choice in their entire existence. And it's not really sure when they make that choice. Even if it's a when question, right? Because again, angels exist outside of time and space too, right? So their choice though, because it's fully deliberate, they cannot repent. So if they choose something other than God, they're making a full understanding choice in that.
So even if the decision was to turn away from God, that would not be considered erring in like a human.
I think from our perspective, we would say yes, it would be.
Okay.
Right, but because they can't repent, they persist in that choice. Right.
Okay.
So you can say that maybe their knowledge is flawed in some way, right? Or the act of the will is flawed in some way by not choosing God. But because it's a fully deliberate act, they can't repent.
Okay.
Right.
You can still be mostly knowing, but choose purposely.
Of course, right, which is what we have. That's how we have the Satan and his angels, right?
Well,
His
and I was
demons.
gonna say that the demons they don't have free will necessarily. Well, they have to follow commands of Jesus. They don't have a choice.
Oh yeah. So they're still under that rule of God. They we see them in the Bible where there's recognition of Jesus for who he is. And they have to obey, right?
They can't.
But the
choose
choice,
not to obey.
they can't. In that respect, they can't. But the free will will come into place. They actually can make the choice initially,
Yeah. Makes sense.
but then they can't repent of that after they make that choice. Whereas we can because we lack that knowledge. Right. Does that help?
Yeah, that you kind of answered my question before I even got to
Oh,
the end. Yeah,
good.
like,
Okay.
I was gonna say, how is it possible for an angel to turn away from God like Satan did?
Yeah. Well, because you say that and you have to understand too, when we're talking about these supernatural things that they're communicated through written ways, human ways, right? We don't necessarily have a full understanding of how that really all works, right? So the perception that we have from the Bible is, Satan was jealous of man. What does that mean for an angel, right? I mean, because again, feelings, are feelings an act of the body or the act of the mind, right? I think in some ways you can say it's really an act of the mind. So, okay, but with an angel, because the knowledge they have, do they really feel in the same way we would as human beings? Like reading the Bible, it says like God was angry. Well, wait, hold on. How does that work, right? Can God really emit emotion, being that he's a completely spiritual being and the epitome of all virtue? And it talks about God's wrath. Well, wait a minute. Now, wrath is a vice, right? That's not a virtue, and God's the epitome of all virtue. So when it says like in the Old Testament that God's wrath came upon them, well, how do we interpret that, right? We wouldn't say that wrath was coming from God, like God was willing that upon these people, these things he created, these beings he created. We could say though, and this comes through revelation over time, that was written at a time when that's the only way they could communicate and understand the essence of God. And as God revealed himself over time to us, we have now a better understanding of what it means when it says the wrath of God was shed upon somebody. That's more of what we talk about, the permissive will of God, right? That God maybe allowed this evil to come upon for a good reason, right? That we may not understand even now, but will be real to us in time when we're with him in heaven. But we also understand that these evils that are allowed, they're done for some good, and some good would come out of it, right? So we would be careful with that, because the same way applies to the angels. Like, okay, an angel was angry, or an angel was jealous. Okay, what does that mean, right? It's really hard for us to actually even comprehend that. Because we can understand from a human standpoint, it means to be jealous or angry, right? But from a being that's higher than us, well, that's beyond our capacity. So we can only put it in terms we can actually fully understand and communicate to each other, right? So it's important to keep that in mind, especially if you read the stories of the Old Testament and even some of the writings of Thomas Aquinas and some of the other saints, right? So good.
Building off of that.
Go ahead.
I love this discussion right now. So from a young age, most people are like familiar with good and evil, and it kind of just makes sense. It's like two sides. So it's interesting to think, well, would the world be a better place if there were no demons and there was no Satan? It seemed like the answer would be yes.
Sure.
But would it make less sense if it was just,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, that's a
Would it
good.
be less balanced? Or,
Yeah.
and is that even a weird way to think about it?
Well, I mean, so it's a good question, because oftentimes we may kind of look at that like, okay, well, what actually caused this to happen? Was an act of God or an act of will by other beings that were created by him, right? And I think it shows that that free will is something that's a good. That Adam and Eve, our first parents, were not designed really to turn away from God. And so the fall, that choice that Adam and Eve made, even though there was some temptation, right, by that, there was still a choice that was really working against their very nature. And that's what's so tragic about that story, is that there had to be a complete denial of the goodness that they were to choose something other than God. And so what that kind of tells us is really the nature of sin. So we can't necessarily have an understanding of the good without understanding the bad. So even that was an act of God that really brought some good for us to have a better understanding of who he is. But this is something that kind of, when we talk about the nature of sin, well, what is sin really truly a choosing of evil over good? Or is it because of our lack of complete understanding, we're choosing a good, but we're not necessarily good deliberating what's better for us? So when we talk about sin, what we're really looking at is, well, if it weren't something that we're good, we wouldn't choose it, right? Choosing food is good. Choosing pleasure is good. But if you're choosing pleasure over virtue, over faith, over charity, right? The error there is not the choice, it's actually the lack of deliberation in the choice. And that's what we say where the error may come from. And that's why when we talk about angels, well, that's already known. They know that stuff is really good. And which makes it even kind of harder to ponder, like, why would they choose that? Right? But we know some did. And only they would know the reason. We couldn't necessarily know that either because of our limited understanding.
And once their choice is made, they can't reverse it.
Correct.
So if you're, the angels that are good today can never be bad,
Correct.
and vice versa.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Part of that is when does that happen?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask.
So like, is it the very existence, they're created a being, they make that choice? Maybe. Does that happen over time? Because an angel is outside of time, right? So time for us is, okay, well, what does that really mean? Do they have like a grace period? I don't really know, right? And part of that's because we're talking about something that's of a higher nature than us. You know, so to put it in human terms, it's very difficult because I can't tell you, right, how that really works. Because I'm not, it's like an ant trying to explain how we do things.
Angels would live in time because they're created beings.
Yeah, but they live in a state
They're-
of being that's
they're
outside of
different
space and
time
time.
continuum than us, but it would still be within a time where things happen before it happens.
Okay, but here's the thing. Where do angels reside, for lack of a better word?
In a different dimension.
Well, we would say they reside in heaven with God, right? At least the good angels would. Heaven's outside of time and space. It's a state of being, a state of existence. So even we at one point will exist in a state outside of time and space, hopefully, right? So to put that into terms that we can understand, we kind of talk about heaven as a place, or you go to heaven, right? You go to this place, right? Because we just don't necessarily have a better way of saying that. I've been trying to train myself to say you go to the state of heaven. Not like, the state of Missouri, it's like the actual state of being, right? Which I think is a better terminology. But that's outside of time and space. So things like even like the resurrection of the body. Okay, well, when does that happen in heaven? Could it happen instantaneously because future, present, and past are all one in heaven? Maybe.
So if Christ's resurrection happens outside of space and time, then that's why
That's why it had a infinite effect.
that's why the consecration
Yeah.
is the actual
Correct.
resurrection. It's
Correct.
not a recreation. It's
Correct.
The resurrection.
Right. And that's part of the mystery of faith, because how does something outside of time and space come into time and space at the Mass? And we can explain that to me, please tell me. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. No one really does. I mean, and these are things have been contemplated over time, right? And there really is no good answer. There's theories, there's thoughts, and the church doesn't really necessarily hold any of them to be definitive, right? So it's a difficult question to answer and even ask, right? Because sometimes we don't even really understand what we're asking.
I don't know, it all makes sense to me.
Okay, good. That's great. You write it down.
I contemplated.
Ryan will be a doctor of the church. We'll write it down. You're good. We're fine. Make it work. Perfect. Yeah.
Maybe because I like Einstein and study all that.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, this dimensional, like, the multiverse, that's something we're kind of looked at. So that doesn't necessarily gate anything that we teach as a faith. It just means that, okay, well, maybe there are multiple places and times that were created. You have to still have to conclude they were created in some way, right? Thomas Aquinas talks about infinite regression, right? You can't just keep on going infinitely through these different times and spaces. There has to be some kind of source, there has to be an end, because that's just what we observe in our world, right? That's the proof of continuity that Thomas Aquinas puts out there, right? But yeah, these things are difficult just because being that we're limited beings, not only in our bodies, but also our capacity to know, we can't necessarily answer that. We can maybe theorize and come up with some ideas, but nothing conclusive. Right?
So is the belief that all angels were created at once, or are they continually?
Yeah,
created?
right. Sure.
The
I mean,
answer
right,
is yes.
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, right. I mean, because again, in heaven, when is once and forever, right? Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you have to look at it this way too, like something contemplated as well. We talked about like our guardian angel. Well, a guardian angel, the angel's identity is based on their mission. So that's something kind of another act of God's love for us, is that there's an angel for each and every one of us that their only job, their only mission, their only identity is to guard us spiritually. Right? So we being limited beings, what does that mean in our eternal reward? Does that angel just, is that our bodyguard for the rest of eternity? They just hang out with us all the time? Maybe. What about souls that go to hell?
Well, I was just gonna say, yeah, that's great if you go
Right,
that.
right, yeah, right, yeah.
The guardian angel's not too happy.
I mean, was that the guardian angel's decision? Like, oh, that's when he decided to not, I don't know.
Can they
You
go
got
with
a
you?
bad guardian angel.
Yeah, I don't know. That's something we
You
could,
got a
we
bad
could,
human.
we can definitely contemplate that, right? Yeah. You know, because again, where does the angel's actions end and our free will begin and vice versa? Right? Because we are given free will. That's an act of love by God. We have these choices we make, right? And so we also deal with the consequences of those choices. Yeah, it can get really deep, really quick, right?
Where do we learn about guardian angels? Is that in the Bible?
Yeah, actually, it talks about angelic beings, and especially in the book of Daniel, Ezekiel. We see Revelation in the New Testament. Well, even the archangels, you know, in Luke and Matthew. Raphael we see in the book of Tobit, and Michael was also in Daniel, and some more apocalyptic books too. We're actually told there's actually 7 archangels. The book of Enoch, which is not canon, talks about Uriel, the archangel. We only know really for sure 3, the names: Michael, Raphael, Gabriel. The rest we don't know. Well, Lucifer, I guess you'd say it was, you know, he's one too, but yeah.
But you can name your guardian angel. Sort of.
You mean give it a name?
Yeah.
It could. That doesn't mean it's actually his name. That angel's name. Part of that. So we look at that when we talk about angelography or demonology, right? When we talk about like kind of we study these things, like in the rite of exorcism, naming the demon is very important. Because the demon wants to be named, wants to tell you the name because of the pride of that demon. But you are supposed to counteract the name of that demon with the actual proper saint. And so angels, being that they're higher, they're more humble. They're not one to reveal their name, right? So we wouldn't necessarily know their name. Nor maybe should we know their name. Yeah, so you wouldn't name your angel Frank, okay. Doesn't mean his name actually is Frank, right?
Nickname.
Yeah, because when we talk about naming is very important. So we see that like in baptism and other things. Naming actually indicates ownership and some dominion, right?
Yeah.
And so like when you name your child in baptism, you're showing this is my child. I am taking ownership of this child. I have dominion and responsibility over this child. That doesn't work with our guardian angel. We don't have dominion over our guardian angel. Right? So you can try that. Good luck, you know.
He may not answer to Frank.
Right. Yeah, right.
It's easier to talk to.
Yeah. Yeah, usually, I mean, we are there is a tradition that the names of the angels usually end in L. Because L means of God. So we talk like Michael, right? Soldier of God, right? Raphael, healer of God. Gabriel, the voice of God, right? So that goes along with their mission.
Where's Uriel?
That's the question I haven't researched that one. That's the Enoch.
So when you say non-canon, it's not in the Bible.
It's not in the Bible. Enoch is mentioned in Genesis. And it's held, the tradition of the church would held that he was probably one of the humans that was assumed into heaven. So there's certain Old Testament figures, so we know that for sure, like Elijah, right? We're told in the gospel, in the Old Testament, that Elijah was assumed body and soul into heaven by this fiery chariot. It's mentioned in Genesis that Enoch walked with God and was assumed into heaven. The book of Enoch, though, if you actually read the book of Enoch, boy, it's somewhat heretical. There's some things that's like, oh, that doesn't,
Good thing it wasn't.
yeah, right. As a matter of fact, it kind of coincides with the ancient heresy of the church, Arianism, right? So it kind of looks at like, God is almost like a created being. There's like knowledge that was only given to certain people. And that's also the heresy that was kind of overcome in the early church too. Now you could say, well, maybe the Old Testament was a little different because there's still development of Revelation. But also too, even the book of Enoch, you can't actually like date it to the person of Enoch. So there's a lot of questions about it, which is why it wasn't put in the canon. So yeah, I would just take it for yourself. But also, it's also thought that Moses may have been assumed in heaven. We're told Moses was buried, but we can't find his body, even though we're told exactly where he was buried. He's not there. So maybe. And the fact that Elijah and Moses appeared with Jesus on Mount Tabor during the Transfiguration is probably a good indication they were assumed in heaven. Good.
Speaking of Elijah, that was one of my questions actually, because I think a lot of Jews were confused thinking that Jesus was the new Elijah. And then Jesus talks a lot about being the Son of Man, but then also he's the Son of God. So could you clarify Son of Man, Son of God, and why they thought he was Elijah?
Yeah. So the whole understanding about Elijah is we're told in the prophets, Micah, a few others, that Elijah would return to herald the coming of the Messiah. So even the gospel talks about Elijah did come, right? And that was in the person of John the Baptist, but not like the actual physical presence of Elijah. Elijah wasn't resurrected and came to actually proclaim the Messiah. It was the spirit of Elijah working through John, right, that proclaimed the coming of Jesus as the Messiah. Now, because Jesus is the incarnation, or also known as the hypostatic union. Has anyone ever heard that term before? Yeah. Hypostatic means literally to stand under, right? So Jesus has two natures, right? Fully man, Son of Man, and fully God, Son of God, right? Now, to say someone's a son of something means they actually have the same essence as that person, right? So like humans only beget humans, right? It's not that it's not that Jesus was actually created, but he was of the same essence as God the Father, right? But when he took on a human body, he also took on our nature as human beings, right? So we would say that his human nature was in complete alignment with his divine. So in other words, he had the capacity to sin, right? And be tempted, as we just read this past week in the gospel, right? But because he was of divine nature, he couldn't, right? His will would not allow him to sin because his divine and human nature were in complete alignment with each other. But that when we say the son of, that's what we're saying of the same essence of man and human, which would be that Jesus Christ alone would actually can claim that, right? No one else can.
And the Jews weren't looking for the Son of God. Right?
No, the Jews were looking, the Messiah was supposed to be of the line of David. And because the Messiah was of the line of David, which Jesus was, they thought he would take on the persona of David, meaning he would be a great military leader. David went out and conquered a lot of lands around Israel, right? He made a huge kingdom. He was a great general, a great warrior. And so being that the Messiah was prophesied to be of Bethlehem from David's line, again from Micah, well then the rational conclusion would be, he's going to be a great king. He's going to kick these Romans out of Israel and give her back our country and lead us. And not only that, then he's going to go out and conquer the whole world because he's the Messiah. He's going to let everyone know that our God is the only God. Awesome, right? But that was never actually prophesied. to be the case. It was just kind of concluded rationally, we could say, from the tradition of the rabbis and the Pharisees and the Sadducees.
So the Messiah was not supposed to be God.
Not according to the prophets, right? Right,
Which is
but
why the Jews today would have trouble with Jesus being anything other than.
yeah, they would, but even David was actually called the Son of God too. So, but the interpretation there was that more of a symbolic understanding, because David's heart was in line with God's heart. I mean, God told Samuel that I'm going to pick someone whose heart's more conformed to mine, and then he picked David. And so, okay, there's more symbolic title involved with that. But I think they were still looking for this messianic general of the line of David, not necessarily of a divine nature, but could also be called Son of God because they were of the line of David, right? So it's, yeah, the interpretation, we have to always have to look at the context of the time as well, right? So we as have an advantage in this time of having salvation history completely revealed to us, right? So we know, because we know history of what actually happened, what occurred, and know that. You can't say the same thing for the Pharisees and Sadducees at the time of Jesus, right? Because Jesus hadn't started his mission yet. Jesus hadn't revealed himself yet. The passion, death, and resurrection hasn't happened yet. But yeah, the going understanding at the time of the rabbinic line was that the Messiah was going to be this military leader, and that's what they were looking for. And it got so bad, there were so many people claiming to be the Messiah that they had to take some extreme precautions to make sure that the Messiah was actually true. So if anyone's actually been to the Holy Land, what you'll see if you're coming from the eastern side of the Mount of Olives, you'll notice that the walls of the old city were all bricked up, right, on the eastern gate, on the eastern wall. And a cemetery was put in front of those entrances. Well, the reason that was because before Jesus, there were so many people claiming to be Messiah. It was prophesied the Messiah would come through the eastern gates of Jerusalem to proclaim that he was the Messiah. Well, they had so many people doing that, they decided to brick up the wall, to brick up the doors, and then put a cemetery, so that anyone who actually, if even they couldn't get through the brick, they would be ritually unclean, right? Because if you go through a cemetery in the Jewish law, you'd have to go purify yourself before you enter the temple. So in order to actually claim to be the Messiah, you had to actually be clean after you're walking through the cemetery, or maybe floating, who knows, right? And then somehow get through these bricks in a mystical way before you even claim to be the Messiah, right? So that caused a lot of issues. So Jesus himself, well, even though he was God and probably could have done it, he was not able to actually go through the eastern gates of the temple because it was all bricked up and all this other stuff happened. Could he have found a way? Sure, probably, right? But he would also do things in a human way to show those two natures of who he is. So yeah, it caused a lot of issues. And eventually it didn't matter anyway, because the whole entire city was destroyed in 64 AD, right? So no one's claiming Messiah for that, because the temple's no longer there. Now, one thing actually gave credence to the fact that Jesus was the Messiah was there's a tradition in the temple that they would hang a linen piece of fabric from the lintel of the door of the temple going into the Holy of Holies. And if it was a good year, the potential for Messiah to come, that linen would turn red, mystically. And if it wasn't a good year, it would just remain white.
A good year for what? For
Well, a good harvest is actually a good spiritual year. Like, it basically was a year favorable to God, right? Well, after Jesus died and resurrected, that piece of linen never turned red again. And then the temple was destroyed about 20, 30 years later. So I don't know, take that for what it's worth. I think probably gives good credence and evidence of who Jesus really was. And I think even Messianic Jews would actually recognize that too. Yeah. But it would.
Hmm.
So that's right. I mean, the Holy of Holies was, the veil of the temple was torn apart. Great earthquake. I mean, there's a lot of natural evidence or supernatural evidence for that matter to say that Jesus really was who he said he was. So I think for anyone who really studies this, really is pretty evident, or even those who don't. But yeah, I mean, why the question we ask, well, why then does the Jewish faith even still exist? Is that really a persistence in pride? Man, that's hard, right? Because you maybe could say at the time that there were maybe a level of pride involved with those people that were still in Jerusalem at the time that witnessed all these things and still not recognize Jesus for who he is. But in the same way, you can say like, well, people who are maybe raised Lutheran compared to Catholic, right? It's very hard for people to like kind of recognize something if they're enculturated in it, right? I think the same thing for Judaism. I mean, any faith that someone's raised in, we couldn't say that someone who's actually practicing their faith as a Lutheran today is a heretic, right? We couldn't say that. We could say that at the time of Luther, that may have been the case because they should have known better. But now you can't necessarily say that for someone who's practicing their faith, even though it's not Catholic, authentically. Now we can say that the Catholic Church, we understand the Catholic Church, it resides the fullness of the truth that you wouldn't necessarily see in other denominations or faiths. But that also takes some convincing for people. And we wouldn't necessarily hold that against them if they don't see it, or say they're heretical if they don't see it. Because there's such an influence involved with upbringing and raising and studying.
You look at knowledge as being truth.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And the more knowledge, as we grow in knowledge, you become closer to the truth.
I think there's a truth there, sure.
The difference between knowledge and wisdom, though.
There is.
I think you can have knowledge
Mm-hmm.
and no experience.
Right,
And you need experience and knowledge
right.
to gain wisdom.
Knowledge and wisdom are both gifts of the Holy Spirit,
Mhm.
right? And there's a distinction between them. So I could have great knowledge about mathematics. And that could provide certain truths, right, that wouldn't be known otherwise. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'm wise in my experiences. Specifically, like, okay, what I mean by that is, if I spend my entire time in a classroom just doing calculus problems day after day after day, but I don't necessarily know how to do my taxes, right? Well, I can say I have very good knowledge, but not necessarily good wisdom. Or I may not know, I may not have the experience of like fixing a car, right? I may have knowledge of actually fixing a car, and actually some people have knowledge of fixing a car and wisdom of doing it. But that doesn't mean I actually have an understanding or a wisdom in the spiritual life, right? So I think you can say that knowledge can lead to wisdom, but wisdom is more of a experiential thing. Knowledge is really more of a study or discipline. Maybe that may be the distinction between those two. Does that make sense?
If we're gaining knowledge, we should have the ability to come closer to truth.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think wisdom and knowledge lead to truth in some way, but just different. I mean, there's different ways of obtaining those things.
Well, would you feel like it holds true spiritually? I mean,
Yeah, well, I think yeah. So yes, to that point, Teresa of Avila, when she was talking about like a spiritual director, she said she'd prefer a spiritual director that's knowledgeable about the spiritual life rather than someone who's experienced in it. And the reason she picked that is because experiential is really more personal. Wisdom is more kind of personal. No, it leads to universal understandings, but it has to be done by me. And my experience may be different in the spiritual life, may be different than somebody else. And we have that tradition also in the Catholic Church. We have these different schools of spirituality, right? So maybe I'm more of a Jesuit-oriented spirituality. And that's been my experience. I've had a great growth with that experience. But I also may have knowledge of, let's say, the Franciscan spirituality, but I don't necessarily have gone through that type of experience, right? So in other words, I can maybe give direction for someone in the spiritual life of a Franciscan without actually going through it myself. But I may have a deeper understanding of the Jesuit because I've actually studied it and have gone through it.
With a body of knowledge of just say God, it would seem that more by bulk would have been revealed to us, and we would be coming closer to the truth.
You mean like through knowledge?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure, yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. I think you definitely can gain truth through knowledge, but because we are experiential beings, we may not actually have a full understanding until we actually experience it, right?
But with the body of let's just say Catholics or Christians, people that have known Christ,
Right.
and that with the body of that and the growth of the knowledge, we should, by just the process, be closer to knowing the truth of God.
Yeah. But also too, I don't know if just having the knowledge. So you're saying, okay, so you're saying, just so I can get clarity. So you're saying like just knowledge alone. Let's say we're just growing in knowledge alone, nothing else. Would we gain more truth than if we actually had wisdom as well? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Not necessarily the
Okay.
wisdom part. I understand that they have to go together.
Yeah.
It would seem like with time and with again the body of knowledge and maybe wisdom that we've gained in spirituality, that we should have grown closer.
Yeah, I think there's truth in that. I think there's truth. That's true. Again, I mean, a lot of that also comes down to the limitation of this human knowledge too. I mean, like we always talk, we talk with the RCA class when they come in every year. That's like, here's the thing. It's impossible for anybody to teach you the fullness of the Catholic knowledge, even in a lifetime, right? So even though it's there, we can grow in it and keep on studying it. You probably will never attain the fullness of it before you were to go on to the next life. You'll have it in the next life, right? Because when we're with God, we have that knowledge and we'll be given that grace. But we may not be able to attain that fully in this lifetime, just because of the vastness of that knowledge. But you're right, just doing the study allows us to grow in truth and understanding.
Well, I struggle a little bit with that because you would think of the apostles and those right after being full of the knowledge of God, first by the personal experience, and then very recently, the next one that came along of its proximity to them.
Yeah.
And it would almost seem like they can be at times light years ahead of us as to what we know and how we would understand God.
Well, I think that's true of like, there's always the stories about, people that dedicate their life to the faith, and you'll see them in the church, right? Yeah, you'll see them in the church like days after day after day, even though they may not necessarily have like, a master's in theology or a doctorate, they have much more knowledge than clearly someone who has a master's in theology. But I think that comes from, part of that is not only the faith, but also the wisdom and the actual practice of the faith, which we would say would be wisdom rather than knowledge. So I think it's a both and for sure. The struggle there, though, would be like, well, even going back to the apostles, well, would the apostles have even understood the advancements we have in science today, right? And part of that understanding of like, how do we apply our faith and morality, ethics, to these different things, right? So part of that is because the authority is to get into the church and the magisterium to make those interpretations. But the fullness of it, but Revelation history, salvation history has always been completely revealed, right? God has already revealed to us everything we need to know to grow in that faith and grow in those virtues. Application, though, is something that's really kind of changed. It can change over time. So as we grow in our culture and developments in science, we have to apply an ethic, right? But the ethic's always going to be the same. There's always going to be fundamental objective reasoning behind things, but the application may change based on that development in science. So a good example of that is IVF, in vitro fertilization, right? So if you're looking at just from like a cursory reading, it's like, well, what's wrong with people having babies? That seems like a very good thing, right? And even if the process were developed to the point where you didn't necessarily have to freeze embryos, or could only implant one embryo at a time to actually be developed, right? The church would still say, yeah, there's a problem with that, because you're separating the marital act from the procreative and the unitive, right? And there's an issue there. That's a problem. That's something that can actually affect your soul. And so it's not that we say that anyone that's born through IVF is less than human. They're still made in the image like this God. There's still dignity there, and God makes good come from these means regardless. But we still would never condone that method because of the separation of the marital act. So that's kind of where we're coming. That's we have to look at those things as they come and say, well, is there a good? Yeah, having children is a good. But the problem with this method is that it's making children into a commodity. Instead of asking a couple that's infertile, instead of saying, well, what is God trying to tell me here? How can I live my vocation through God's will? There's the overwhelming desire to have a child. And because of that, they have this process that makes the child into commodity rather than a gift. And that's also a problem. So I would say that because that's one example, but we also have to look at those applications as we grow, right? Make sense? Okay. It's 7:24. We want to call it, or anyone else have anything else you want to talk about? Questions, comments, concerns, heresies?
I'm going to keep story of my grandson who's 6. He's in kindergarten here, and he wanted to say the new grace that he learned at school. So he started out, Angel of God, my guardian dear. He said the whole guardian angel song was, his prayer was so cute. I thought he was saying great.
It could be.
It's great.
Yeah.
But I love that he knew it,
That's awesome.
and
Yeah.
that they taught it to him.
Yeah.
I thought that was cool.
That might have been one of the first prayers I ever learned, actually. The angel God prayer. And I didn't know until later that there's actually 2 prayers, one for the morning, one for night. Yeah.
That's the morning.
Well, I think the morning prayer is angel of God, my guardian dear, to God, like guard, rule, and guide, amen. I don't know the one for night. So
Google it.
we could, I don't know. Why not? Should I Google it? I could, I guess.
So quick question.
Sure.
How was school been the last 2 days without masks?
Good, I guess. I don't know.
Oh.
I only teach one class over there a week. I'm with the 8th graders on Fridays. So I haven't really been invited to the classroom much this year. So I don't really spend a lot of time over there, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I know that there's been a lot of, yeah. I say this once, I say it all the time, but I wake up every morning praising God, I'm not a pastor. I mean,
That only happens.
He doesn't have-
yeah, I mean, okay, that's the only way I got it. I'll look it up later. I'll get back to, I'll put it in the comment section for the angel of God. That's the angel of God prayer that they have. That's one in the morning. I'll try to find out what the other one is. But no, I mean, it's funny because like, and I know this just from my time at Boeing, that regardless, when you make a decision, you're going to make people mad at you, regardless.
Yeah.
So this whole mask thing, you can say there's good evidence to say we probably should go to optional, and I think there is. You could say there was good evidence just to keep it all mandatory. Okay, fine. Regardless, there are going to be people that are going to be mad at you. So I know there's pastors been called who went mask optional were called murderers. They're trying to kill the kids. And there were other pastors who would mask optional or mandates and said, well, you don't care about the kids, you just want them to be behind and lag. So it's a double-edged sword, regardless of what you do.
I'll say that 2 Sundays ago, before the mandate ended, everyone in masses wearing masks. And then last Sunday, no one was. It was like all at once. And I was thrilled to see everybody's faces and see their smiles and see you up there
Yeah.
just without the mask all the time. I was thrilled.
I was leaning more for not wearing the mask for deport. Like I got to the point where I wasn't wearing it for a while, and then I started wearing it to distribute communion. My tact was also if I was there with the server, I would wear it. If not, I wouldn't. Just because I don't know where parents are with that. If they don't have it, but whatever. But yeah, I think I've been kind of over the mask since about September, personally.
But what was
Yeah.
important about that was you had a congregation that was together doing what the body of them felt like was the right thing to do. And then similarly, the behavior, that after that was strict, that they were all on the same page as that. The discord is where the problem is.
Yeah.
And it's been a growing problem for the country and the faith community as well. When you have people getting called names.
Well, right.
And
Yeah.
you've lost your way then.
What was actually kind of fascinating about that is depending on what mass you went to. So if you went to like 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock, yeah, probably about 90% of the people wear masks. Some of the other ones, like the 5:30 at night, it's probably more like 50-50. The 6:30, probably more when not, but even that started kind of even off a little bit as time went on. So yeah, 6:30 on Sunday. 6 a.m. I think majority of people wear masks to 6 for most, yeah. But
Oh, it sounds where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I've seen elderly
Right.
and concerned.
Yeah, makes- yeah.
Children, below a certain age.
well, yeah. Like,
You know,
if I go to
it's
hospital, I
interesting.
wear one.
It was interesting because I was in Texas for 17 days, never saw a mask.
Well,
In the mall, in the restaurant, at mass.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't exist on it.
Yeah, the sad thing is I hear people now who are like kind of just who are not necessarily at high risk of getting it and still kind of freaked out and want to wear it, for whatever reason. I mean, and again, okay, it's up to you. But I wonder how much of this has become like more of a phobia than really a rational fear, right? I don't know. I really don't know.
And with the Omicron variant being so much more contagious, I've heard that regular old cloth masks are essentially doing nothing. So unless we're all wearing N95,
yeah.
which we're not.
And not only, but also like new N95s like every 4 hours too.
Yeah,
That's just, I mean, so it's really it's
Let's just skip it up.
Right.
That's my way.
So yeah, it's yeah. I mean, again, I think as anyone's had a scientific background, that you go with data. Data can change, and data gives you more clarity as you go. I just think it's also interesting too. There weren't really a lot of studies done on the masks initially, and even now where the data seems kind of limited. That seems like something we should be like sort of looking at from like day one. But, well,
I think it was data, it's just those in charge of residents who get it out there.
Maybe.
Because then nobody would
I
wear
can
it.
tell you there's data, and being in
Yeah.
healthcare, there's data on masks.
yeah, well,
And the spread of bacteria, there's plenty of, it's how things were
mm,
presented
mm,
and how they were interpreted.
yeah,
Parsed for sure.
yep, sure, it's part of that too. I mean, there's different factors here. So.
I had a completely different question. Last year, the church, the parish, or Monsignor, they gifted us, formed the,
Yeah,
and was that this year as well, or?
yeah, it's all through Flocknote.
Yeah.
So now we have, formed was like that was kind of presented, it was kind of, yeah, everyone registered would get that access. Now it's going through Flocknote, which is Word on Fire, but I think formed is also part of that too.
Okay,
There were two, there was another one that we dropped the subscription to.
And I just was confused by it.
Yeah, no.
I know last year for sure, formed it was.
Yeah. I would say keep on using it as long as you can. If you still get access to it, use it.
Well, that's what
Yeah.
it still seems to be coming up and
Yeah.
really been done, so I'm wondering if it's.
We are
Because
doing,
formed, it's, yeah.
we are doing a Lenten series every Wednesday. So we're here, as you guys know, we're probably here, we're in confessions on at 6 p.m. till 7:15, and then we'll Station of the Cross at 6:30. Then afterwards, we're presenting Bishop Barron's. He has some information on the sacraments. So we're doing formation on Wednesday nights with that for Lent. We're also having noon mass on Wednesdays.
All right.
Confessions at 11, then mass at noon. So tomorrow we'll be doing that. If you guys are interested. And Maryland, if you want to sleep in tomorrow, you can come to the new mass.
Hard to break all that. Right, Marilyn?
Right,
You wake up anyway, huh?
right. If you're early, you're early.
Yeah, not so much anymore.
I know, I said history.
Yeah, I did.
So yeah, just put that out there. And of course, yeah, so I think form is still being presented, but we also have Word on Fire for Flocknote, so you can get
Yeah.
back to that too. That's all Bishop Barron stuff, so it's really good. Yeah, and also just a word to anyone, please make sure that you fill out the all things new.
That's the big 75 question survey.
Yes.
It is if you have children.
Okay.
If you don't have children, actually it's a lot quicker.
There was a shorter survey.
That's the parish, yeah, so fill out both.
Okay.
But if you had to choose between them, I would say the all things new one would be more important.
It didn't take that long without kids.
I
No,
know,
You have kids in school, no.
no, done, right, I know.
Okay, yeah, I was wondering what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you have kids though, it adds more questions.
Okay. I don't think we got the big 75 question survey then.
Okay, are you on Flock, you're on Flocknote?
Yes, for some things, but I don't know if it's all.
Well, you should have gotten a Flocknote, if not,
Go to the bulletin.
or the bulletin has one,
Oh, I can just go to a link of it.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Here's the website.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's the first thing you showed on the website is the big.
Yeah.
right,
Even Flocknote sends you to the link. doesn't it?
yes, yes. So if you also had paper copies, but I think those actually, I think those kind of went pretty quick. Because I think by the after 11 o'clock mass, we're all gone.
Mhm.
So
I'm sure it's easier to count the electronic. That's probably.
definitely, yeah, it would be, because we have to mail in the hard copies.
Eileen said she'd make them up, or she'd print them as people wanted them.
Yes, yeah, you can contact the rectory, get them if you need them.
Were you made aware of the questions before they were submitted?
I will say though, I think the questions were, for the most part, well done. I think they were really trying to get an understanding of how much people are involved with the parish and how they're growing their faith, which I think is going to be really one of the driving factors with all this. So what are we doing well? What are we doing poorly in that? So yeah, so I think it'd be good. There's going to be another one coming out, I think, in the summer for schools. So they'll be kind of looking at formation in schools and kind of, get an understanding. So especially for our parents, it'd be good to fill those out. But yeah, a lot of this is really, this next year is just going to be kind of developing the criteria of what's going to happen. And so I really have no idea what's going to happen. Nobody has any idea what's going to happen. We can make, maybe reasonable hypotheses, right? But really, there's nothing, everything's on the table at this point.
Do I understand correctly that this has been used in other areas of the country?
It has,
And
yeah.
they acted upon it, or maybe not.
Well, okay, so one of the struggles with this, this is through LDI, was the company that kind of the consulting firm that helps with this, right? They've done these things in other cities, and they're doing them in other cities currently. Part of the problem is there's nothing actually has been. We have to be able to see a process from start all the way to end. So the cities that have been done before, they're really only about maybe more than halfway through the process at this point. None of them actually have gone through the entire 5-year, 10-year plan. So it's really hard to make conclusions when we don't actually have conclusive data. But one thing that has been kind of encouraging is that they're very clear about saying, well, criteria that maybe work for Pittsburgh may not work for St. Louis, which is why we have a say in how it's developed, which is what this whole survey is trying to get at, right? Yeah, which also may not be the same. We work in Columbus, Ohio.
And you did
Or
say
s-
they learned from mistakes. from
Yeah.
the other
Right.
surveys and parishes.
I know there's been discussion that, like, the plan, I think the original plan was after the criteria was established in Pentecost of 2023, implementation may take like 3 years. Well, there's been some discussion about that seems rather long, right? Why not just rip the Band-Aid off right away instead of prolonging it for 3 years, right? Which seems reasonable. I don't know. And maybe that might be what happens here.
No, it's supposed to be 3 to 5 year implementation.
Well, I know, but see, even that though can be debated and kind of looked at, right? Because maybe that might not work for
So
us.
here's the date. So
Right.
June 5th, the survey closes, the model feedback and final decisions will, meaning they'll ask each parish feedback, the pastor's feedback, and that happens for almost an entire year.
Right.
Until May 28th of 23. And
Yes.
after that will be the final decision, and then the parishes will get together and figure out how to implement that decision.
Correct.
Which could take 5 years.
But what I'm saying is even that is not necessarily a hard, fast rule. So if we look at it and say, we only really need 6 months.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
great, that's 6 months. So there's been discussion about that stuff too.
And if that survey's been given in other places and revised, I needed some, I don't knows or not applicable, there was a missing,
Yeah.
and because I was doing it online, I couldn't write in between the letters.
Right.
I can't answer that because this is what happened.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah, I mean, I would just say do the best you can.
I did.
Yeah,
but I
you know.
was a little frustrated.
Yeah,
They want it to be
Yeah.
consistent so that they can do the same survey in 3 years, 5 years,
Right.
and see if
I
our
know.
belief and our faith is changed.
yeah.
It's all about evangelization.
And Joyce, to be fair too, I mean, I'm always more of a fan of open question personally. I think that's always kind of a better way of kind of getting information from people. But
Unless you have 20,000.
right, right.
And it's super hard to measure.
Yeah, sure,
Objective answers.
sure.
You can't quantify that.
And if we were doing maybe just like a parish survey, that might be the best way to go.
Yes.
But it's harder when you're getting, 400,000 people trying to be involved with it. So, yeah, I don't know.
Keep praying.
Yep. And just answer
Put
if
it
you
on
want
the
to answer
list.
surveys. Yeah. Now, one thing I didn't check, we can do it multiple times.
I actually went back on.
Oh, did you?
And
You can.
Well, I couldn't.
Oh, really? Okay.
Going back right then, maybe if I did it now,
Oh,
I
okay.
couldn't do it.
Yeah, I'm not advising anyone to do that, but it's kind of be interesting to see if you could. I don't know.
I would ask if you
Stop
could-
the balance.
Yeah.
Could somebody else do it on my computer?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't know,
You can't.
right? Yeah, I don't know.
Or could I do it on the library's computer?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it like tracks your IP address or how that really does it.
No.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm on the committee here, so I know all these questions.
Okay.
But it's, yeah, you could take it 10 times if you wanted,
Mm.
and nobody know the difference, but they found that people don't really do that.
Yeah.
So
I
it's
don't
not
wanna
gonna
answer
skew the
them.
result. But, yeah, they're not tracking you, because then you've got 6 kids maybe taking it on the
Sure,
same.
right,
track.
exactly, right, yeah, yeah. That's the other thing too, like any child that can read, have them take it too. That's, the more input, the better, So they want to hear from everybody. Good. All right. Thanks for coming, guys.
Thank you
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Mark.
My pleasure.